Welcome and thanks so much for joining us for the second annual Stories event and our second anniversary as Brookline.News. I'm Sam Mintz. I'm the editor of Brookline.News. Just going to say a few things before we get started. Many of you were here with us last May when we did the first event, and I'm very pleased to say that in the year since, we've continued to grow and expand and increase what we're doing here in Brookline. We've now got a full-time staff of 3 people at Brookline.News. We've got a growing army of volunteers and freelancers. We've developed robust internship programs with several universities. On a personal note, I got married in the last year, so. Brookline.News is really moving out of startup mode, and I think we're establishing ourselves as a trusted news outlet for Brookline. We're continuing to keep a collective eye on the town. We post news stories on our website almost every day. We are branching into new areas like audio and video. The variety and depth of what we're publishing is increasing as well. Each month we have tens of thousands of readers visit our site. But beyond the numbers, I hear all the time how critical people think our reporting is for the community, and we really appreciate that. After the recent local election, we talked to a number of people who said their votes were really informed by what we did, and that's a really gratifying thing to hear. The best part of this job is telling stories about the fascinating and sometimes eccentric, interesting people, places, ideas, events that make Brookline what it is. And it's a real privilege to be able to do that for myself and our team. A few weeks ago, I was at the memorial service for Kitty Dukakis, trying to figure out how to distill a fascinating life, an 88-year life, with so many twists and turns into a few hundred words. Other times, we're on the sidelines of a high-energy high school sporting event. We're watching an hour go by at a local business and seeing what that's like. Or we're covering local government meetings where we're sometimes the only person in the room. And I do have to admit that sometimes I find myself wondering, where's everybody else as these small groups of well-connected residents are deciding matters that are going to shape tax bills, shape physical infrastructure, and their children's education. But that's why we're here, as Meghna just said. The stories we publish are not always ones with happy endings, and this is an especially tumultuous time in Brookline, like in many other places in the country. In just the last few weeks, we've written about a longtime resident and federal worker who was forced to uproot his life here in Brookline because of changes to his job at the VA. We've written about a popular small business owner who's close to hanging it up and calling it a day because of the economic pressure on his company. We've written about a teacher who was laid off while she was on medical leave, in part because of budget constraints at Brookline schools. But these are important stories to tell, and I'm very grateful to the people who let us into their lives to tell them for all of you. And they're people just like the folks who you'll be hearing from tonight here in the front row. So with that, I'm going to introduce tonight's host, Meghna Chakrabarty. Meghna is a lot of things. To me, the most important one is that she's a big supporter and friend of Brookline.News, so we appreciate it. But you probably know her as the award-winning host and editor of the NPR program On Point, and the former host of WBUR's Radio Boston and the Modern Love podcast. In her WBUR bio, Meghna says that she is the mother of 2 bright sparks and the lucky spouse of a wise and patient man. So here's Meghna.
Can everyone please give Sam another round of applause? Brookline.News is truly doing incredible and vital work. And Sam, I'm part of a bunch of education-related WhatsApp groups, being a school mom, and every time there's a news story about schools that drops from Brookline.News, it's like it spreads like that instantaneously. So we need you. We need you. So fun times, right, everyone? There's that, it's now a cliche, but I think it's a Chinese proverb of like, is it may you be cursed to live in interesting times, or may you live in interesting times? So these are interesting times. I don't actually have I promise it's not a long intro, and I do not have a story to tell you, but I just want to share the answer to a question that I get asked a lot. People very frequently, since the beginning of this year have asked me, what's it like to be a journalist now? And I was thinking about that today, and my answer, the answer I should start giving is, it's just like being a researcher, or a scientist, or an educator, or a healthcare worker, or anyone who works in civil society. It's just like that, because what we're experiencing collectively as a nation is the complete tectonic shift of the presumptions we had about how a small d democracy is supposed to work, and that has an impact on us all. And I have to say I'm quite lucky because WBUR has the support of the greater Boston area, so it makes us capable of continuing on with strength, which is not true in other places in the country, so I'm very lucky. I'm also lucky that I'm kind of weirdly unruffled by crisis. I got that from my mom. My dad was like the jittery one, the brilliant jittery one, and my mom is like the rock of our family. And she would also, every time anything went wrong in our family, she would always just say, just keep going. Keep working. Also, when I was really like going off the deep end, she'd say, be tougher. And so yeah, I was thinking about that because at times like this, the crisis serves as almost a clarifying fire, right? It burns away all the miasma of minutia that I usually fill my head and my life with. And when all that burns away, I'm left with the simple answer to the purpose of my life. It's two things. One, to take care of my family, obviously. And two, is to do whatever I can to contribute to the common good, right? So that's it, right? No, thank you, but I actually feel like it's not a special conclusion, but that is how I feel my purpose on earth is. And so mission focus, right? And this is where I come back to my mom, because in times like this, I keep hearing her say, just keep going. So your presence here tonight to support Brookline.News, Brookline.News, is a way for all of us to collectively just keep going. So for everyone who is in the same moment of, let's say, again, crisis and the clarifying nature of a crisis, don't stop, okay? Keep doing what you're doing on behalf of all of us. Just keep doing what you're doing. No matter how hard it is, no matter how many changes you have to make in how you do, what you are doing is more important now than ever. It's vitally important. And I absolutely believe that if you just keep doing what you're doing, ultimately the weight of that work will, it gets put on the end of that arc, right? That arc that continues to bend. You're adding to that. So with that in mind, I'm a little preachy, so I'm gonna stop with the preaching, but I really feel strongly about this community and all the people in it, and I wanted to tell you that you have my support, and just keep going. So with that, now let us turn to our storytellers tonight, who will also give us sources of inspiration and thought. And our first storyteller is Sean Liu. And Sean is an emergency medicine physician at Mass General Hospital. She says she loves how her job takes her all over the world, but what she loves most is sharing stories and laughter over a meal with family and friends. So here's Sean.
It's about a month into the pandemic, and we get the call that we've all feared. Massachusetts General Hospital is about to run out of ventilators, and we, as doctors in the emergency department, have to learn this new algorithm to decide which patients are going to go on a ventilator and which patients we don't predict will survive. We are terrified for our patients, and we're terrified for ourselves. One of my doctor colleagues says, what if we need a ventilator? In the end, we know that we'll do what we've always done, which is make the best decision we can at the bedside. In those weeks and months, our shifts ended the same way. Exhausted, I would go to the basement of the hospital and get new scrubs. And I'd go in the bathroom and ever so carefully try to avoid touching anything and exchange my contaminated scrubs for my new scrubs. And then I'd walk to my car, wipe down the handles, and finally get in the car and take off my mask and feel like I could finally breathe without my mask on. I'd trudge home and forage in our garage where we were quarantining our groceries, starving because we didn't ever eat on a shift. And then I would doom scroll until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, just trying to learn about this new virus and how to manage it. In the morning, I'd wake up and take over homeschooling our 3-year-old and our 6-year-old children. As a reporter, my husband would work during the day, and I would take the evening and weekend shifts in the emergency department just to figure out some kind of childcare for our children. I tried to follow what the school was telling us in terms of lessons plans, but soon discovered that teaching young children is really just not my strength. I don't know why 3 + 2 is 5, it just is. One day, my daughter, Kylie, our first grader, would say, "You don't make math fun, Mom." And I just burst into tears no, none of this is fun at all. At the same time, I was managing my parents' anxiety and my Chinese relatives' anxieties. "Sean, you're not wearing enough PPE." They're wearing hazmat suits and diapers because they don't take anything off during their shift. "Okay, Mom, I will go find something." So I go to, I look online, and the only thing left is this painting coverall from Home Depot, but it's extra, extra large. And I put it on, and I think, COVID or not, Mom, I'm not wearing diapers, and I'm not wearing this coverall to work. I was used to stress, in my job as an emergency doctor, but there was just no reprieve from the constant, "Mama, Mama, Mama, Mama." The only time I had alone was on my stationary bike in the basement, where I would just pedal and pedal my frustration and my stress away. Desperate, I basically looked online and said, "I need help," and we signed up my first grader, Kylie, for an online writing class. Just desperate to have someone teach her that knew what they were doing. Because back at the hospital, it wasn't just ventilators we were running out of. Sometimes PPE and masks were in short supply. I'd have to forage around the ED, or the emergency department, looking for goggles, and then we'd wear these recycled N95 masks day after day. We'd complain to our administrators, and they'd say, "Well, there really isn't good data. There are no good data for mask wearing." And I basically was seething at this point, wanting to protect myself and my colleagues and my patients and my family. I knew that masks save lives. I knew that we could try to get ahead of this pandemic. I knew this because my great-grandfather, Ulienda, invented the first respirator mask 100 years ago in China. He basically wrote the blueprint on how to end pandemics, or epidemics, I should say, and how to save lives. At work, when I told my colleagues, they'd say, "Oh, that's cool, but we still need high-quality data." Fine, forget my great-grandfather. Can't we just look to the East? Because they've been dealing with this for the last 4 or 5 months. They're all wearing masks in Asia. Can't we look outside of the West for some solutions sometimes? I finally went to the press and wrote op-ed articles for CNN and US News and World Report, talking about what my great-grandfather had done and masks. And I was one of the first physicians in emergency medicine to just talk about what was happening on the front lines. I was just basically asking people to socially distance and wear masks. But To be honest, I was also trying to combat and challenge the anti-Asian sentiment of the time. Trump was using terms like Kung flu and China virus, and it brought me back to those feelings I had when I was in elementary school, and the kids, being kids, would just make gestures with their eyes to make fun of my eyes. But this was just far worse. Every day became tense. I heard a resident say, "Those masks are from China." And I would hear patients say that they didn't want to be treated by me, which really had never happened before. An MGH anesthesia resident was harassed, she was Asian, was harassed on her way out of the hospital to the T. Suddenly, I just felt like, did everything have racial overtones? And I started to fear what would happen to my kids. You know, I could change my clothes and my scrubs, and I could wear masks, but could I protect them from a hate virus? Would they be harassed on a playground or something even worse? At that time, I Zoomed with my therapist, and she said, "Sean, I've seen you incredibly sad before, and I've seen you frustrated, but I just have never seen you scared." I gave my passwords to my husband and to my little sister, just in case, I don't know, something happened to me. And then my sister broke down in tears because she knew then how scared I really was. They were able to put a name on an emotion that I didn't have time to really acknowledge or even know how to name. Thankfully, months later and weeks later, things improved. We didn't run out of ventilators, we didn't lose any colleagues, and ultimately people started to take masks wearing seriously. But I was still really concerned about what was happening in terms of anti-Asian sentiment, and I knew I wanted to do something, but honestly, I was just too exhausted to go to a rally or a protest. But I still felt like I wanted to try and make a difference. At that time, Kylie was assigned a nonfiction piece for her online class, and I suggested that she write about her great-great-grandfather. And thankfully, then, she actually listened to me as a mom, because now it's like, bruh, mom, please. So we got the autobiography that my great-grandfather wrote right before he died, and we learned that he grew up in Malaysia, and that he was one of the first Chinese and Malaysian to actually study medicine at the University of Cambridge in England. He was ultimately recruited to northern China in 1911 to fight this deadly plague. And it was there that he invented this mask that became the predecessor for the N95 mask that I wore every single day at work to prevent the spread of COVID. And this was also the story of that his great-great-granddaughter was writing for her online writing class. Writing that story with Kylie was just so meaningful because it really kind of gave me this idea. During that time, we were just reading and reading. There was nothing else going on. We had no activities. And so she and her brother and my husband and I were all just reading books about heroes. But we noticed that none of them really ever featured an East Asian. And so I thought, maybe we could write a children's book about my ancestor. But I really had no idea how to go about doing this. Eventually, one of my close friends connected me with a book agent, and he said, "Okay, it needs to be more whimsical." And if you know me at all, whimsical I am not. And how do you tell a story about the plague in a whimsical fashion? So we tried and we kept at it, and eventually the book, Masked Hero, was published. Kylie was 7 during this whole writing process, and we asked her, questions like, how is this illustration? Can we use terms like the plague and death in books where that age group's gonna read? She was basically our content expert, and for that, she got senior authorship. Fast forward a couple years later, we were traveling all over the United States, doing book talks and doing interviews with the media, and she was asked how it felt to be an author. And she, in her shy manner, said, "I've always wanted to be an author since kindergarten." And now I am. I chuckled and was proud of her and happy for her. Back at home, at our home library, a mother came up to me at one of our talks and she said, "I'm so glad you wrote this book, because I've not been able to find a book for my daughter that featured an Asian as a hero." I started to tear up and I hugged her, because this is exactly why I wrote the book. Maybe I couldn't change the minds of adults, but maybe I could change the minds of kids about racial attitudes. Maybe I could give East Asian kids a source of pride. I'm glad I retired from homeschooling, but I'm really forever grateful for that time to do that nonfiction piece with my daughter for that online class that never would have happened otherwise without COVID, because I never would have delved into the life of my great-grandfather, and we never would have written that book, because that book was my outlet for all of my fears and frustrations and my stress. And that book gave me hope to hang on, that the pandemic could and would eventually end. Thank you so much.
Wonderful start, wonderful start. Sorry, you think I would know how to work a microphone? There we go. All right, next up, Leroy Watkins. Leroy was a young man with a big dream, but how to navigate that journey when there's a wall of family opposition. Do I have that wrong? Number 2, am I in the wrong order? It's the right order. Okay, let me do that again. Forgive me. Leroy, you get a double introduction. He was a young man with a big dream, but the question was how to navigate that journey when there was a wall of family opposition. So Leroy Watkins, welcome.
After graduating from Northeastern University, I did what any college grad did, and that was look for a job. So I turned to Craigslist. I was excited when I got a second interview for a direct marketing company. And I remember for that second interview, I was going to be with Mike in North Chelmsford, Massachusetts, servicing the Domino's Pizza client. So we drive to North Narnia, we park in front of a house, and Mike knocks on a seemingly random door, and a guy answers. And Mike says some words like, "Nothing crazy, free pizza, and $30 per coupon." And then he gives Mike $300. I was floored. I needed to know what kind of Harry Potter wizardry was happening. So sitting at McDonald's, Mike broke down what he was doing, and he drew a nice triangle, and he said more words like bottom of the triangle, top of the triangle, and own office. When he said the words own and office, my eyes got huge, because ever since I was a kid, I wanted nothing more than to have my own business, my own legacy with my own hands to help improve the world in some way. So I was excited. Told my parents about the opportunity that Mike laid out on a piece of paper, and I said, "Yeah, Dad, there's a triangle, and at the top of the triangle, I get my own office." And he said, "Son, you went to a great school in New Jersey. You have a degree from Northeastern University." He drew a pyramid. It wasn't a triangle. He wasn't happy. And my dad's a super accomplished guy. He went to Groton, growing up in Queens, went to Yale, Fordham for law school. He even can try cases at the Supreme Court. And all my parents wanted were for their 4 kids to do one better than them. And Leroy III was not doing what was according to plan. So my parents wanted me to take a job that I could work my way up the corporate ladder, have some stability, and go that route. And they wanted me to be more like my uncles and aunts who are all successful lawyers, doctors, politicians. And Northeastern is not Yale, and door-to-door sales is not law school. And so, Leroy wanted something different that my parents wanted. I wanted my own business more than anything. So I said, I'm taking the job, but I'm gonna be great at door-to-door sales. Turns out, I was really, really bad at door-to-door sales. Months go by, and my parents are really disappointed in my decision. They tell me to get a job, get a salary, get a 401k. My grandmother, who's this 5-foot-tall woman, questionably, she runs the Watkins family like Don Corleone, was telling me that I needed to get a handle to my name, get my Juris Doctor, get my MBA, that I was dragging down the Watkins name. That I was being a bad example to my younger cousins. That I was not gonna be on the Watkins family Mount Rushmore. And all that really hurt. Just disappointing her and her not understanding my vision and my idea and my dreams. And I remember as a kid driving with my dad to soccer games, we would talk about, he would give me tips on how to score a hat trick. But in between those dad coaching tips, we would talk about Watkins & Watkins, the father and son law firm. And when I was in college, our conversations were full of hope, optimism. And after I took this job, our conversations were monotone, short, as if I was all of a sudden uninteresting. And I could hear the disappointment in my parents' voice every time I talked to them. Now, in addition to this family pressure for this job that I took, I was no closer to getting to the top of this fabled pyramid. And my fellow peddlers were passing me by. And I remember sitting in my car, I broke, I'm crying, snot coming down my nose. I'm poor, I have no one on my team, my electricity to my apartment is shut off, and I have a comically large eviction notice on the front door to my apartment. I can't ask my parents to bail me out again, so I have to quit. And then I remember what one of my door-to-door sale friends said to me. He said, Watkins, it's always darkest in the middle of the tunnel, and then you just gotta press on. So I was doing something that my family could understand. They're all very successful in their own right. And I wanted my own business. I wanted to build my own legacy. It wasn't a very defined path. I was going through a forest, and right now I was in the middle of this forest. And so I took my friend's advice and I pushed forward. And I got to the top of the pyramid. I got 15 people on my team. I was giving motivational door-to-door sales talks to offices around the country. But I never opened my own office. Instead, I started a company called My Bike. And I remember being so excited telling my parents their son was a 24-year-old CEO, my life's dream realized. I was doing what I always wanted to do, but they were disappointed. They wanted me to go to corporate America and get a real job. My grandmother implored me to get a job with a salary for a stable company and get my success through a Fortune 500 business, or to be a prominent businessman or attorney. But I didn't want that. I wanted my own business. My parents, my grandparents just couldn't understand the untraditional route that I wanted to go. So I forged forward with My Bike, but as a personal compromise, I was like, let me get a job so I can at least afford life while doing My Bike. So I find this company that does sports camps and sports clinics called Viking Sports. I'm hired as a coach, and I quickly become the general manager. And with this guy named Zach, and me and Zach start working at Viking around the same time. And when Vikings ownership changed hands, me and Zach ran Viking Sports for the new owner, Dennis. And me and Zach did this together for years. And one day, I'm putting on my Viking uniform, and my wife, who was the Viking nanny, which is how we met, comes in the room and says, we're gonna become parents. That was the best news I could ever receive. It's what I wanted more than anything in the world, to be a dad. But reality set in, and everything crashed down my feet because there's no way I could afford to raise a family on my meager Viking wages. So I panicked. Told my parents they're gonna become grandparents, and they said, son, this is the time where you need to focus on your family, get a job, get health insurance, and provide. My grandmother said for me to put my entrepreneurial pursuits in the rearview mirror and to stop being less selfish and to focus on Jen and my family. So I told Dennis, who owned Viking Sports, that I quit working at Viking. And he says, how about you buy it? I was not expecting that curveball answer. I was excited. And then I told my wife, and she's like, yeah, let's buy it. And the thing about buying a company, it's very, very hard when you have no money. And Dennis wanted a comically large amount of money for a down payment for Viking. So I talked to Zach, and I told Zach about the opportunity, and I said, hey, we should be business partners, and he agreed. And we also agreed to split the down payment. And of course, Zach had his money like that, so it's my turn to come up with my share of the money. My parents were a hard no for cash. On top of paying for my rent, they also had to deal with the psychological stress of their oldest son's career decisions. And they gave me $5,000 to buy some custom branded My Bikes from overseas that turned out to be junk. But my dad did connect me with the CFO at his company, and we were gonna use my bike to qualify for an obscure loan to buy Viking Sports. And it was perfect. It was going according to plan until it didn't. And everything fell through. Now, like that time in my car, I was freaking out. I couldn't buy Viking. And I was gonna be a dad in a couple of months. I had severe neck pain. I couldn't breathe right. And my wife was genuinely concerned about my health. She said, go see a doctor, where I was diagnosed with stress. Now, I had no path forward to buying Viking, and I had to let Zach down with this information. We spent hours dreaming of this Viking sports utopia, and now I have to tell him that I'm out. But he says, Watkins, get to Brookline High School right now. We have to talk about this. And passionately, we discuss it. And he says, it has to be us. We have to do this together. We work so well together. And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Watkins, if it's about the money, I'll pay for us. That's what he did. Today, Viking Sports is one of the largest private recreation and events companies in Massachusetts. We have about 100 people that work at the company, and we're expanding nationwide through franchising. My parents, who were my biggest doubters, are now my biggest supporters. My mom recently asked if she could have one of my Viking hoodies that she sees in my Instagram reels. And so now I'm the CEO that I always wanted to be. I am developing a legacy that I always wanted with my own two hands, positively impacting the world the best way that I can. And my grandmother, my lovely grandmother, I was talking to her the other day, and she said, oh, my entrepreneurial grandson. I talk about you to my friends all the time. You're so successful. I never doubted you for a second. Thank you.
Leroy, that would really hit home for me. The disapproving high-achieving parents. My dad would always say, you have to be better than us. He had a PhD, so he'd be like, you can't just get one. It has to be two. And not only did I not get two, I didn't even get one. And I didn't go into science or engineering. When I ended up in journalism, my parents would always say, well, at least she has her science degree to fall back on. And they also only came around when my aunties and uncles out in Oregon where I grew up would be like, they'd tell my parents, oh, we heard Meghna on the radio. She sounds really good. And then yes, she's really doing a good job. We've always supported her also. So I got you on that one. Okay. Now, our next speaker was a state rep on the North Shore for 14 years and was regional administrator for FEMA New England. So her path to public service began when an ordinary moment was shattered by the realization that her family was in danger. Dubbed the East Coast Erin Brockovich, Lori's path to action was paved with soot. Welcome, Lori.
It's okay. So my girls were 2 and 5 at the time, playing out on the back deck on a really hot summer day. Suddenly, they came bursting into the kitchen, singing a Sesame Street song and giggling and toddling around the kitchen. It was just one of those sweet moments that just made me smile. But then suddenly, I noticed that something was weird. I looked down at the floor, the white tiles of my kitchen floor, and I noticed a messy array of little tiny black footprints where they had been dancing. My first reaction, I will admit, was, oh shoot. I'm a busy mom. I have my own accounting practice. The last thing I wanted to do was clean the floor again. But then I started to think, what's on their feet? So I followed the little path outside, and I looked at the back deck, and it was weird. It was completely covered with a thick layer of black soot. Now this was strange to me. I lived in Marblehead at the time. There was no industry that I knew of in town that would be responsible for such a thing. I mentioned it to my dad, who was born and raised in Salem, right next community, and he didn't hesitate for a second. He pointed to the coal-burning power plant in Salem and said, "It's only a mile away as the crow flies. I bet that's your culprit." So at that moment, I knew I had a lot to learn. Monday, I picked up the phone and I called the plant. A very pleasant PR person took the call, and she assured me there was nothing to worry about, and she would send somebody over. Now, I appreciated being taken seriously, but something in her delivery indicated to me that she had heard this before. Took about a month, and an insurance adjuster showed up at my house. He pressed little pieces of Scotch tape into the soot, rolled it up in glass vials, and shipped it off to the lab. Another month later, a letter arrived. Dear Mrs. Ehrlich, we have determined that the soot on your deck could be from us. Because of our Good Neighbor program, we're willing to power wash your deck for you, free of charge, free. But before we do that, release us from liability. Sign here. I stood there holding that letter, and I realized at that moment that they really missed my point. It was never about the deck. I didn't care about the deck. I cared about what was on their little feet, and what are we breathing all the time? And who's gonna power wash our lungs? You know, I wasn't looking for a bribe. I just wanted them to stop polluting my family. And because this was a Good Neighbor program, I knew I wasn't alone. So it was time to find my neighbors. So I decided to write a letter to the local newspaper, letter to the editor, and in it I included my phone number. My phone rang off the hook for a good 2 weeks. I heard terrible stories. I heard stories of people worried about cancer clusters, especially downwind from this plant. The plant itself had been there since 1952 and had never bothered to install scrubbers on their stacks that would filter the emissions. I heard stories of dump trucks that would come around to the neighborhoods full of coal waste, offering it up as free fill. You could fill it into your garden, you could fill it into your yard, all free. I also learned that this Good Neighbor program would routinely clean houses, cars, and would even detail boats in the harbor for free. How could this go on for so long? I wrote down all these stories in a big yellow pad, and I took the pad and I closed it, I pushed it to the back of my desk, and I cried. How could this go on for so long? My husband Bruce and I talked about maybe relocating or moving out of the community, but we ultimately decided, you know, this is our home. This is our community. We're not gonna run. The plant should leave. So once we decided to fight, it was time for action. My very first action that I took, I called the power plant and I told them to shove their Good Neighbor program. And you know what? It felt amazing. But then the hard work began. I knew I couldn't do this by myself. So I took the yellow pad, I pulled it forward, and I started to flip through and call everybody. So we started to meet in coffee shops. We met in living rooms. I started an email group, and soon enough, we started to grow. And we named ourselves HealthLink, which is a great name. And as soon as we started to be successful, the company that owned the power plant, a company named PG&E, which is Pacific Gas and Electric of California, they started to get a little nervous. So they did everything they could to discredit us. They tried to convince people that if we were successful, the lights would go out. They told people that we were hysterical housewives. Well, I know I wasn't hysterical. I was exhausted. I was anxious. I was really pissed off. I had not slept in months. The kids were living on macaroni and cheese. My tax clients were all on extension. And I actually had to get accustomed to being verbally attacked in public meetings and in the press. And on my worst days, or day, really, I needed a bodyguard. So then all of a sudden, the Harvard School of Public Health released a study that validated everything. The Harvard School of Public Health study indicated that 181 people would die every year from the pollution from that plant and one other in Massachusetts, and thousands of people would be sickened. Now, studies can be abstract, and PG&E did all they could to paint the study as complete garbage. So my friend Lisa and I decided one day that we need to make this real for people. So we went out and we bought a giant roll of black paper. We, from this paper, we cut out 181 sort of Keith Haring style body cutouts, and we outlined them all with white chalk. We placed these cutouts, 181 of them, in front of PG&E's headquarters in Boston. And this was with a whole bunch of HealthLink people. We had a sandwich board that explained all the details of the Harvard study. It was such a powerful image, and it actually, at the time, it's the equivalent of going viral. It actually got national attention. Around the same time, I learned that there was this incredible woman out in California with a funny name named Erin Brockovich, who had also taken on PG&E successfully out there. Now, the movie hadn't come out yet, so I picked up the phone and I called her. And you know, she is just as badass and tenacious as as Julia Roberts played her in the movie. We decided to team up, and she was a great ally. and really just somebody that really helped us sort out testing and everything. But soon in the press, I was labeled the East Coast Erin Brockovich, as you heard. I'm still not entirely comfortable with that name, but I watched how it propelled our cause forward, and I was grateful for that. And then I discovered that a once pristine drinking water supply for 80,000 people was contaminated by this power plant with 5 to 6 feet of coal waste at its base. This is a whole other story, but I led the 6-year cleanup for that drinking water supply. And then, this went on for over a decade. And then finally, I gave up my accounting practice, and I decided I wanted to be in the room where the decisions are made. So I ran for office, and I won. And one night, while I was in a late night session, my phone rang. Now, the power plant had recently had an explosion that actually killed 3 workers, and still the plant, that stupid plant, would not shut down. So this call came in when I was in the State House, and it was a reporter I had worked with from the very beginning. And he said, "You're not going to believe this, but the plant just announced that it's closing." So I hung up the phone, I exhaled. The battle was over. And sure enough, in 2014, I was able to witness and cheer as the plant was demolished. So, yeah, thanks. So, when I think back about those little footprints in that trail that I followed, I really sometimes just can't believe it. We not only shut down a power plant, but we found our voices. And, we found each other. And you know what? We found out something else. We were the ones we were waiting for. Thank you very much.
These are great stories, right? Well, let's keep them coming. Mark Ludwig is the executive director and founder of the Terezin Music Foundation and a Boston Symphony Orchestra member emeritus who blends his musical career with social causes promoting tolerance and dialogue. And on the home front, Mark is Asher's devoted FRR soccer and baseball dad. Mark, welcome.
So I'm in Carnegie Hall to perform Gustav Mahler's Resurrection Symphony. And like its title, this is a monumental work for a large orchestra and chorus. And one of my wife's clients, Fred, he flew in from Seattle for this. Fred loves Mahler. So after the concert, we're having dinner. Fred's ecstatic. I think it's the Mahler. No. For Fred, he just finished a race in the Atacama Desert in Chile. And his face is all aglow because he's describing how he's running through this slot canyon under the desert night sky. And he says, next to the birth of my daughters, this was the most mystical religious experience of my life. And then he looks at me and he said, you look like a runner. And as an artist, you've got to do Atacama. I said, you know what, Fred? Somehow running in the driest place on earth at my age, I'll take a pass, right? 3 years go by. I'm now in Prague, and I'm visiting with Susanna Ruzicova. Susanna had survived Terezin, Auschwitz, and Bergen-Belsen. And after the war, she went on to become one of the great harpsichordists of the 20th century. Now, at this time, I'm in the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and I'm also a Holocaust music scholar, researching, recovering, and performing music of composers who perished in the Holocaust. And Susanna was really big in helping me with my research. But on this given day, she implores me. She says, you must really tend to this inner bank account. Fill it with great music, art, and painting. You need not be in Auschwitz, but we all have periods of despair, and you need to be able to draw from your inner bank account. And she squeezes my arm to make the point. About 10 days later, I'm back in Brookline, and I am driving our daughter, Sarah, to school, when bam, this car plows into the driver's side door. Sarah and my wife, Kate, who was 9 months pregnant with Asher, they're fine. I get out of the car, and from my shoulder down onto my thumb, I feel like it's just been wrenched from my body. Right? But I dismiss it because, I think, it's the shock of the accident, and I've got to get on a flight to Omaha to solo with the orchestra. Pain gets worse. It gets so bad that it's excruciating to just try to get the instrument up. I end up taking painkillers to perform. I know something's not quite right. For the next 3 years, I go through 4 surgical procedures on my shoulder. God knows how many hours of physical therapy, all to no avail. My career in the Boston Symphony, it's over. A huge door had closed not only on my career, my art, and a major part of my identity. I had been performing since I was 4 years old, right? All those countless hours of practicing, rehearsing, performing gave me purpose and meaning. But the thing that I really missed, being immersed in those rich harmonies of Brahms, the sublime pathos of Bach and Beethoven, or the exhilaration of playing like Stravinsky's Rite of Spring or that finale of Beethoven's Ninth. And think about what it feels like to be at one with this music, with your fellow musicians and the audience. It's a mystical, transcendent space like no other experience. And once you've experienced, you crave it. My soul needed it, and now I've lost it. So the day that I submit my resignation to the BSO, who should be in town? Atacama Fred. So we're having lunch, and I'm giving him the news. He doesn't miss a beat. He said, great, we can do Atacama next year, right? My wife, she backs him up. Yeah, you need to do this. I am cooked, all right? I mean, here I am, I'm rudderless at sea, right? And these guys are sending me out into the desert, right? So let me tell you what this race is about. It's 155 miles over 6 days. That is 6 back-to-back marathons. It is self-sustaining. That means I have to carry a 20-plus pound pack of my gear and all my food for the week. So I get a trainer. She puts me on this endless routine of squats, lunges, sit-ups, long mileage, power hikes, and runs. So my life, which had been flats and sharps, is now about like calories and kilometers, right? One other thing she says to me, I think you should get a playlist for your iPod. iPod. This is my new musical instrument, the iPod, right? So, a few days before I leave for the race, I go to see a dear friend and mentor, Dr. Anna Ornstein. Now, Anna survived being sent to Auschwitz twice. And then after the war, she went on to be preeminent, and I mean legendary psychiatrist of her generation. So who better to see when you're freaking out over this race, right? I tell her what I'm in for. She looks at me, and in her Hungarian accent and laser-like eyes, she said, "You must have acceptance and gratitude. Okay. You must accept whatever you must endure, and you must be grateful. I repeat, acceptance and gratitude. Now go on and do this Michigan race," right? So the day of the race comes. Day one starts at 8 a.m. at an altitude of 11,000 feet, right? That backpack of mine suddenly feels a hell of a lot heavier, all right? It's a grueling day. The temps reach over 100 degrees. I'm several miles in, and all of a sudden, the flag markers, they mark the course, they're gone, right? So one of the locals had grabbed a batch of them. I'm looking out, way out in this vista of sand, and I see other racers, they're in the same pickle as I am in. I head towards them. Eventually, I catch up to Atacama Fred. We find our way back on there, and under the scorching sun, right, we are talking about politics, music, art, cooking, family. It's like one of these epic conversations that really bond you to a person, right? But the most important thing is, it got me over that damn finish line, right? So I fall into my tent. I'm a mess of euphoria and exhaustion. The next 2 days, to say they're challenging, that's to put it mild. The terrain is treacherous. The heat is unrelenting. I'm exhausted. I'm holding on to Anna's acceptance and gratitude. Right. That can only take me so far. All right. I'm digging deeper, and then I started thinking about those composers who wrote this incredibly beautiful music under unimaginable brutality, deprivation, and death. Suddenly, that race, it pales. I continue on. We get to day 4. My body is a wreck, all right? I've had to bore holes through my toenails to release the blood underneath, right? The soles of my feet, bloodied blisters, right? Every step now is a new experience of a level of pain I've never imagined, right? I get into the checkpoint, and I now spend the next 40 minutes rebandaging my feet. And while this is going on, I've got my inner desert demons talking. You know, you already did 3 marathons. You know, you get to walk away proud. And then I hear the voices of friends who say, you know, this race, this is so not you. I give you 1-2 days tops, right? Great. So I have that going on. And then, you know, I see the image of Asher giving me the thumbs up. And meanwhile, while that's going on, I also see in the offing the sweepers. Now, the sweepers, these are the people who collect the flags, and then if they catch up to you, you're disqualified, right? So between that and the voices, and then I go back to Asher with a thumbs up, and I just say, the hell with this. I pull the insoles out of my shoes, I jam my swollen feet in there, and I turn on my iPod. I crank it really loud. And the fear of the dreaded sweepers and Chaka Khan get me moving, all right? And I mean, I'm moving and a grooving, okay? Because in the next 45 minutes, I've passed at least a half dozen racers, and I get over the finish line. Now, I will say to you, that's acceptance, right? Gratitude, not so much, all right? We get to day 5. It's not 26 miles. Oh no, it's over 50 miles. It's called the Long March, right? We're into late afternoon, and I am staring up at this massively steep sand dune. I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the pyramids look like anthills, right? And I'm slogging my way up, digging my poles in. Meanwhile, the wind is sandblasting my body. Keep going, we get into the night. And with the night, the temperatures plummet, and so too do my spirits. I'm leaving the next to last checkpoint. I'm cold, I'm shivering, I am exhausted. I'm in like a catatonic-like state. I have been on that course for over 18 hours. I am now reduced to electrolytes, caffeine, and music. So I fumble in the dark for my iPad, and I turn on the finale to Mahler's Resurrection Symphony. I mean, this is the piece that got me into this mess, right? So imagine this finale. We're getting near the end, and the orchestra is like this locomotive. It's just a wall and a wave of sound that's pushing the chorus to this ecstatic declaration of the soul has risen. And then the music is over, and I am surrounded in the dark silence of the desert. And then I look up, and I see that spellbinding Atacama night sky. It's ablaze with stars. I swear to you, I feel like I can reach up and slice my hand through the Milky Way. And then at that moment, I start sobbing. I am filled with one wave after the next of gratitude. Gratitude for what I had lost, gratitude for what I have. That race and that magnificent sky had given me what I thought I had lost forever, to be back in that mystical, transcendent space. And then my inner bank account, it was overflowing. Thank you.
I'm just going to leave it up here. Okay. These are incredible stories. Our next storyteller is Anthony Flint. He has been a storyteller about cities as a correspondent for Bloomberg City Lab and the Boston Globe, and as a senior fellow at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. He's also been a town meeting member since 2021, a year that brought his own challenge, as we are about to find out. Please welcome Anthony.
It's a spring day in 2021, and I'm flat on my back in the neuro ward of Beth Israel Hospital when an earnest young resident strides in and writes these words on the whiteboard: Guillain-Barré syndrome. What an interesting name for what's wrong with me. I had been admitted after feeling strange pangs and unable to sleep, a strange tingling feeling under my skin. And I learned what was afflicting me. The doctor explained Guillain-Barré syndrome is an autoimmune response. It's named for the two French doctors who discovered it, GBS for short. An autoimmune response where the body essentially attacks itself, mistakenly believing that the healthy peripheral nerve tissues needed to be destroyed. So, lying there, dazed and weak, hooked up to an IV, I took it all in. I was even a little bit fascinated as a journalist, trained to ask questions and find answers. But that was why I was feeling so numb and was basically unable to walk. When I learned about this, I was dazed and really taken aback, and I was determined to get better, but lying there in that hospital room, overlooking the muddy river and the steeples of Brookline beyond, I braced myself for what was to come. 3 months of blood transfusions and steroids and physical therapy at Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital, where the marathon bombers were treated. Learning to walk again, trying my best to move from wheelchair to walker to cane. In some of my first short trips outside the room with that walker, the same model that my 90-year-old mother at the time was using. I just had to shake my head and think, what the heck just happened to me? And though I was surrounded by some of the best medical care in the world, and my friends, and of course, above all, my family, I still felt isolated and alone. I later learned that there are only about 6,000 cases of GBS annually in the US, and here I was one of them. So I was feeling very unlucky. When the doctor first made the diagnosis, I was hopeful, though, because he said that most GBS victims actually fully recover. They get better because miraculously the body repairs itself. The damaged nerves in the peripheral nervous system can regenerate. Unfortunately, 4 years later, that hasn't happened with me. The doctors say too much damage was done. So more bad luck, feeling unlucky, a minority within a minority. But I was determined to get out of this and to make it through, although I was feeling very unlucky and alone. There's another reason, though, I was feeling kind of like the odd man out and a bit isolated and alone. Remember, this was 4 years ago, in the midst of the pandemic. We were all scrambling to get vaccinated, and I had reported to Boston Medical Center. And what they were serving that day was the J&J shot. And it was the J&J shot that triggered my GBS. The FDA actually issued a warning later that summer saying that the J&J shot was triggering too many cases of GBS. Very few, but still too many. I was one of the 100 cases that formed the basis for that warning, which basically shut down the shot in the US. So here I was, feeling like the wind had got knocked out of me. I got this news in my room at Spalding at the time in July of 2021, top story on the evening news. I was sitting next to my trainer, and she held my hand, and I cried. But still, as a journalist, I was determined to do some more research. What was going on here? You can get GBS from a number of different ways, a virus, a flu, bacteria, spoiled chicken. But it turns out that actually several vaccines trigger Guillain-Barré syndrome. The J&J shot, AstraZeneca, the flu shot, the RSV shots, Shingrix for shingles, and many of the vaccines that you see advertised on TV. So what was going on here? This seemed to me to be a problem, maybe even a design flaw. So I've become something I've never dreamed of being, an advocate for those of us who have been injured by vaccines. There are thousands of us after COVID. I've joined a group called React 19 that is trying to revamp a program that was begun under Ronald Reagan to have all the cases reviewed when things go wrong. The vaccine makers themselves are shielded from liability, so they can't be sued. So I'm writing op-ed essays and talking to congressional staff, and I believe in what I'm doing, but it's a fraught place to be. Here I am, a good progressive in Brookline. I am a big believer in the greater good of public health. But it turns out there's a kernel of truth about the potential harm, unfortunately, of vaccines. My friends don't know what to do with me. They like my social media posts, but I sense there's a little bit of wariness. Had I become some kind of anti-vaxxer? The answer is no, of course, but another conversation with another doctor, this time a friend, really spelled out how difficult it is to talk about this. My friend is an emergency room doctor who is no stranger to bad things happening. He and I have been talking about my journey having GBS throughout these past 4 years. We caught up the other day. I tell him how my son has become a bit of a track star, and he tells me how his son is graduating from college. And then I turn to my advocacy for the vaccine injured, and he says, you know, I don't think we can really talk about this. I insist, perhaps somewhat obnoxiously, and we get after it. He has the view, like most doctors, that vaccines save lives, that they're overwhelmingly safe and effective, and the pluses just far outweigh the minuses. He can come right out and say this, but as many doctors say privately, that it may be just the cost of doing business, and that I should take one for the team. It stings, but it's something that I've heard before. I reply that that's all true, but there's got to be some kind of safety net for the people that were actually injured by a vaccine. I'm not talking about the conspiracy theory stuff, the autism or infertility or sudden death or mind control. This is an actual documented adverse effect of GBS. And so these cases should be reviewed, and ultimately, I argue, the vaccine makers should be held accountable and make a better product, one that doesn't trigger GBS. Well, there comes a time, even talking to an old college friend, where the conversation, you know, you can just kind of sense that it's coming to a close, and that time had clearly come for us. So I hung up, and I was quiet for a while, and alone again. But I don't want to stay stuck. I think we just have to figure out a way to have these conversations. And I'm holding out hope that we can. Thank you.
All right. No one, dramatic pause, is more familiar with the story of Brookline.News than Julie Rafferty. Julie is one of the founding members of Brookline.News who recognized the urgent need for a news outlet for Brookline. She is the Brookline.News board chair and former journalist who now consults to nonprofits, and she has an important message for you all. Julie, welcome.
There we go. I have a great job tonight. I get to say thank you, gratitude. I have immense gratitude to Magna, our host tonight, and to our wonderful speakers. You've done a tremendous job. I gotta give a special shout out and thank you to our event co-chairs, Lucy Chi and Jamie Smoller, and the great host committee who organized many aspects of this event and got you all into the room tonight, even though it's like 45 degrees outside. I really want to thank Iris Adler and the program committee and the coach, Cheryl Hamilton, who worked with all of our storytellers tonight to help them overcome any stage fright, which I didn't see any of tonight. And I also want to thank our sponsors and our event supporters. And most of all, I want to thank Joanne Leotard, who conceptualized much of this event last year and made the first year so great that made it possible to have the second year, because we wouldn't have had a second annual without the first annual and without her. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for supporting this event tonight and for having supported Brookline.News since our inception. Okay, we're here tonight to hear stories from our friends and neighbors, to see our friends and neighbors in the hall, and probably just to get away from doom scrolling on our phones and listening to CNN. That said, I think we're also here because we want to see our democracy survive. And we recognize that media in general and local media in particular, we need it just to know what's going on so we can be more informed members of our community, our nation, and our world. But the media at every level, I hate to say it, is at risk. And that puts democracy at every level at risk as well. Marty Barron, the former editor of both the Boston Globe and the Washington Post, recently noted that democracy encourages a debate about policy. But he said, it presupposes that we all agree about facts. And yet, he says, the elements we have traditionally used to establish facts have all been devalued. Education, expertise, experience, and above all, evidence. All are being dismissed, denigrated, denied. Well, what does this mean for media? Well, Marty says, we not only have to tell the truth, we have to show you the evidence. We have to explain why it's important, and we have to make sure that the evidence wasn't really manufactured by some human or by AI. That all takes time and resources. As Sam mentioned earlier, it's going to town meetings and being your eyes and ears, not just relying on the meeting notes generated by artificial intelligence or the town afterwards. It's investigating tips from members of the community or something that's been posted on Facebook, and digging deeper, asking the hard follow-up questions to separate fact from rumor and fiction. But you know, $40 billion in ad revenue that used to support news at all levels has permanently disappeared from traditional news outlets in the last 20 years. It's gone to Google, it's gone to Facebook, it's gone elsewhere. As a result, 3,000 news outlets across the country have closed. They simply can't afford to operate anymore. Luckily, a few of us here in Brookline decided we weren't going to settle for that because we think facts are important to a functioning democracy. And I think you're here tonight in part because you believe facts are important to democracy too, and that it's worth paying for. And so, you guessed it, I'm up here for the pitch. As Sam mentioned, we have 3 full-time employees, plus a great group of freelancers who make it possible for you to know what's going on in Brookline. Increasingly, we're networking with other similar news outlets throughout New England to see how we can work together to grow fact-based journalism. But the costs of uncovering and reporting facts don't decline over time. And there are many stories we would love to report, but we simply don't have the resources to do it. So I hope you will give generously at www.Brookline.News. I encourage you to encourage your friends to sign up for our weekly newsletter and to give generously too. If you'd like to host a house party and invite your friends over so that we can meet with them and tell them what we're doing and why it's important, we'd love to have you do that. I think there was something in your program books that you can fill out, leave it at the back there, we'll follow up. And that's all I've got to say for tonight for the pitch. I'm now going to introduce our last speaker, our last storyteller. Last year, we began the tradition of including one Brookline High School student in our storytelling event to highlight some of the great talent emerging in our town. So tonight, we will end with a Brookline High School graduating senior, Maria Udalova, one of those all-around Brookline High kids, studious, politically engaged, and a debate champ. As she prepares to go off to college, it's our pleasure to welcome her for one more Brookline audience.
It's fall of my sophomore year, and I'm sitting at my computer looking for a volunteer opportunity. I need something that'll be relatively close to my house, something that ends early enough so I can go home and do my homework, and something that'll hopefully look really, really good on my Common App for college. A few days later, I walk into the food pantry on High Street. It perfectly checked all of my boxes. And if I'm being honest, it was also the first thing that popped up when I searched volunteering in Brookline. So on my first day, they put me on bag making duty in the back. This involves getting one paper bag and putting it inside of another paper bag to reinforce it so it doesn't rip when you put the food inside. But here's the problem. I have a really terrible cold. And I don't know if this happens to you, but when I get sick, I become super sensitive to noise. And suddenly, the rustling of the paper bags is the noisiest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. To make things worse, this really soft-spoken guy volunteering next to me is trying to have a conversation with me, and I can't hear him because it feels like my head is blowing up. Basically, my day's miserable. But next week, I come back. And it's not just because I still need the volunteer hours, it's because I'm genuinely starting to love the people who I'm working with. My manager is this really funny guy who's constantly cracking jokes, and the guy from my first day, when I can actually hear him, turns out to be lovely. Plus, I had just moved to Brookline, and I didn't really have any friends yet, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity at a once-a-week scheduled hangout with people other than my parents. As I keep working there, I'm finding things out about the people who are coming to the pantry. I guess that before I started volunteering, I thought that people who came would be more invisible or obvious need. Maybe homeless individuals or people with disabilities who couldn't work and therefore needed the food assistance. But everyone who's coming in kind of just looks like my neighbors. There are teenagers and people clearly coming straight from work, a nurse in scrubs, or a man in an MBTA uniform. Eventually, I graduate from bag making duty, and they put me at a food distribution table in the front, where I can actually talk to the clients, which is wonderful, because there are very few things that I love more than talking. I start getting to know the clients, and I'm hearing a lot of different languages: Japanese, Spanish, Portuguese. Eventually, I scribble on my own name tag, "Я говорю по-русски," or I speak Russian. Now, this is something that really excites the Russian-speaking clients, and they start to really open up to me. They tell me about their lives, their families, and they ask me about myself. More often, they ask me where I'm from. It's a bit of a complicated question because I was born in Sochi, Russia, and then I moved to Cyprus, and then England, and then Florida, and now I'm here. And as my junior year gets closer, the questions that I'm being asked at the food pantry start mirroring the questions that I'm being asked at school and pretty much everywhere else. Where are you thinking of going to college? This is a question of particular importance to me because college is actually the reason that I moved to Brookline. You see, when I lived in Florida, I lived in this really small town called Celebration, and it was great. The weather was beautiful, most of my friends lived nearby. The only problem was that my school was pretty terrible. It was really overpopulated. We had to pull trailers up to the campus just so we could fit all of the students. The students weren't super academically motivated, and there were fights almost every single day. So my family and I decided that we should move to a better academic environment. We chose Massachusetts because my sister had lived there and loved it, and my parents decided to leave it up to me to decide which town we're gonna live in. I know. So I do my research, and about 3 weeks later, I sit my parents down at the dinner table and present them my choice in the best way I know how: a PowerPoint presentation. So I click through all the slides, and I show them the pros and cons of the 3 choices that I've narrowed it down to: Newton, Lexington, and Brookline. All the choices are academically sound. They have a lot of really interesting activities and extracurriculars like debate and lacrosse, which I'm looking forward to continuing. But ultimately, I want something a little bit more urban and definitely closer to Boston. So I go with Brookline. And Brookline definitely meets and exceeds all of my expectations. It's also pretty different from Florida. The academics are much better, and there are so many really great activities and programs. I'm especially interested in the arts program. And my mind is absolutely blown when I find out that there's an entire building just for freshmen. I also find a lot of students talking a lot about college, and the conversations that they're having sound really different than the ones that I was used to having back home. In Florida, when students would say that they were applying to Harvard, it was more like a joke and an impossibility. Here, it was a frequent reality. I also find that a lot of students are more competitive. They're constantly comparing their SAT scores, their GPAs, what programs they did over the summer, and discussing what would give them a more competitive edge during the admissions process. Honestly, these conversations are making me feel a bit unprepared, and it's a feeling that I really didn't anticipate when I was putting together my PowerPoint. I also find that a lot of students aren't really thinking about how they're going to pay for college. For example, one time I was talking to my friend and I asked her, "Have you filled out the financial aid forms?" And she said, "No." Why would I do that? Whereas by my senior year, it's definitely something that I'm freaking out about. And I'll admit there was more than one night spent in tears and many more nights frantically searching for as many scholarships as I could find and applying to all of them. I keep catching myself thinking, what was the point of my parents and I moving to Brookline if I get into a really good school and I can't afford to go? So earlier this year, I decided that I should look for a way to save more money. And I decided to ask the manager at my food pantry if I can start collecting food there too. The day that I decide to ask, he looks at me and he says, "Yeah, sure, you could start collecting food." "For a friend?" And I say, "No, for me." Immediately, his face drops and he says, "Oh my God, Maria, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that you were in such a situation." And I downplay it. I say, it's cool, it's fine. I'm just collecting food. But then he proceeds to apologize profusely for the next 3 minutes, which kind of only makes me feel worse. And the day comes around for me to start collecting my food. And for some reason, I'm still feeling ashamed about it, so I try to do it in a sneaky way. This proves to be impossible because in order to get my food from the pantry to my car, I have to carry 3 humongous bags all the way through the food pantry in front of my fellow volunteers, clients, and oftentimes my classmates. And I know that they're not judging me, but for some reason, it kind of still feels like they are. Now, I'll share a secret with you guys. I recently committed to the George Washington University, where I'm going to be studying international relations. Thank you. And I got a full scholarship. That's also how I felt when I got the news. But for some reason, when I say that, people's face doesn't change. They don't spend the next few minutes apologizing to me, saying how sorry they are that I had to get a scholarship in order to be able to go to college. They're just happy for me. They don't see the bag of food and the financial aid as the same thing. But why? They serve the same purpose, to ensure more stability so you have the opportunity to build a more secure future for yourself. One is just a little bit more immediate than the other. When I move to DC, I'm looking forward to starting at a new food pantry because I know that the people there will be kind and supportive. And now I have more of an appreciation for belonging on both sides of the table. Thank you.
Congratulations, Maria. Really, you deserve everything that'll come to you in your life and more. So congratulations. And thank you all tonight for joining us. Thank you to all of our storytellers. Lori Ehrlich, Anthony Flint, Sean Liu, Mark Ludwig, Maria Udalova, and Leroy Watkins. Thank you, of course, to Brookline.News, which is why we're all here, for keeping us informed about all of the issues facing our town: housing, education, transportation, and also letting us know about the newest pastry shop. Important news. But again, I'm just going to echo what Julie said before I release you back all out into the wild. They cannot do it without your help. So, www.Brookline.News. And thank you so much for coming tonight, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.